welcome to another episode of You Can't Make This Shit Up. Our special guest is Seth Hyman, and he's going to be talking about his candidacy for state attorney for the Ninth Circuit. I hope I got that right because they don't get to retake it. So take it away. Tell everybody who you are.
Well, my name is Seth Hyman. I am a local lawyer here in Orlando. I was a prosecutor 9 years ago in Orange County, and the Ninth Judicial Circuit is Orange and Osceola counties. I've been an attorney for 15 years, and for the last 9, I've exclusively practiced criminal law. 3 years I was a prosecutor, and the last 6 I've run my own criminal defense law practice where I take cases throughout all of Central Florida.
And you are over 25, right?
I am 47.
Well, you didn't have to give your age. I was just doing, because you have the 5 years experience. Look, everybody in our audience usually watches our stuff, so it's like we talked about judicial stuff. So I was like, hey, I remember that. I don't remember a lot though. So why on earth would you put yourself up for state attorney? What was in your mind? Like, are you crazy?
No, I'm not crazy. Well, I grew up in this community. I grew up in Maitland. My family has lived in Maitland, and I've lived in Orlando downtown in different neighborhoods, but my family has lived in the community for 45 years. I love this community. I'm one of the few locals who can say they grew up surrounded by orange groves, and
Yes.
we've grown as a community so much, and I've always wanted to make sure that I contributed and gave back. And I moved away after high school, came back about 10 years ago, and when I started working at the state attorney's office, and I just have an interest in public service, and seeing how that office has been run. The last 2 administrations, I've just strongly disagreed with how that office was run, and I felt the desire to try to change that.
Well,
Go ahead, David. No,
I would like to welcome you to Washington Manor South.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And 45 years here in Orange County in Florida. That you don't see, at least I don't see that often. And I'm a transplant from Chicago. I've been here for at least the last 8 to 10 years. And you've seen so much, and you've seen the area grow. What is it that you believe could be improved once you become state's attorney?
Well, unfortunately, in the last 2 administrations, there have been intentional policies instituted that have minimized the prosecution of repeat offenders and violent offenders. They're, both my opponent in this race, who is Monique Worrell. She's the former state attorney. She is running for re-election. She is eligible to run for re-election, and she's my opponent. And so before her, Aramis Ayala was someone who both of them ran on the premise that our entire legal system, criminal legal system, is inherently flawed. I completely disagree with that. When I was an assistant state attorney, the vast majority of people that I worked with had been trained under Lawson Lamar, who was a great state attorney and former sheriff here for 25 plus years. And I think that we need to get back to that. Our community has grown so significantly, but it's important that we maintain our small town values. There's still a core of people, plenty of people, who have lived here 20, 30, 40, 50 years or more. And we don't want our city to become unrecognizable.
Sure.
You mentioned that you are from Chicago.
Right.
So my mother's from Chicago. My grandparents are
really?
from Chicago, were
excellent.
when they were alive. Yes, so I have a connection to that city. And I actually just visited Chicago with my wife about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, excellent.
And as much as there are wonderful things offered in Chicago, I was very concerned because of crime there. And we would go into open businesses, and because of crime, they had to keep the businesses locked, and you had to press a buzzer for them to open the door. One thing that makes our community so great, whether it's Osceola County or Orange County, is that we still have the kind of small town neighborly vibe. And I want to keep that. And the way we keep that is keeping our community safe.
Excellent. Excellent. I know that moving as we were talking off screen, moving to this particular area reminds me a lot of some of the neighborhoods that I grew up in, and having that neighborly feel, that closeness, that connectedness is really important to me. I grew up in the community on the southeast side of Chicago where, everyone looked after each other, so forth and so on, and that contributed to the safety and the low crime. And yes, Chicago and just about any big city, you see that, more reporting or more awareness of some of these crimes that are just hard to conceive of, especially as I was growing up. We grew up with, gang wars and the crack cocaine epidemic. But what I'm seeing now is very concerning.
Well, David, I agree with you. And, so much of our economy is based on tourism, but not only tourism, it's based on people wanting to move here. The construction industry, real estate, people have to want to start families here, start businesses. And in order for people to desire that, we have to have a reputation of a safe community. And we do, but we have to make sure that we carefully hold on to that.
Sure.
Now we have cities out west like San Francisco and Los Angeles. Their economies are really struggling, and the main problem is crime. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, if you were to tell someone, "Oh, I'm going to go on a trip to San Francisco," the first thing that they would think of is, "Oh, go see the Golden Gate Bridge or have some sourdough bread," or something like that.
Right.
This day and age, if you told your neighbor you were going to go to San Francisco, they'd be worried about your safety. And that did not happen overnight.
Right.
It didn't happen over the course of 1 year or 2 years. It's incremental. And so we have to be careful, because if we have a prosecutor whose entire philosophy is based on the fact that jail doesn't do anything positive, whether it's to protect the community or to give justice to the community or to protect victims, which it seems to me that Monique Worrell comes to public safety from that perspective. We can't maintain the type of city and community that we have had, and that's so important.
So most Republicans have no idea about the state attorney, because we haven't voted for one because they keep locking us out of this race.
Right.
So thank you. We will finally have somebody that will actually go to the general election. Yes, I did say that, guys. We will finally have a Republican. I think it's a tragedy when you think law and order that we lost as a Republican Party that spot, because usually your sheriff and your state attorney, you really kind of leaned, even if you were liberal, you said, I'm going to put that in the conservatives' hands because they hate everybody. No. I'm always joking. But yeah, no, we've always had those roles. We've always, like most places I go, even if they're liberal, the sheriff and their prosecutor are usually conservative because we all want to be safe. So what has happened? Do you think has happened here in Orange County, in Osceola?
Well, in Orange and Osceola counties, Joel, you touched on the reality that the problem is we have a closed primary system, and there is an emphasis on looking at the numbers. I keep hearing over and over, and I'm the Republican candidate. Monique Worrell's the Democrat candidate. But if you look at 2020, in fact, I'm the first viable Republican candidate to ever run for state attorney. There was only one prior Republican who ran back in 2008, but she had never been a prosecutor. In fact, she had been a public defender and practiced, family law, divorce law, and things like that. I practice my practice is exclusively criminal defense now, and I was a criminal prosecutor before. So I have for 9 years, all of my work life has been criminal law. And so what happens is that you have focus on, well, there are this many Democrats registered and this many Republicans registered, completely ignoring the independents. But in our community, independents, NPAs are very important voters, the most important voters. And so a lot of times the Republicans feel that they can't compete, or there's not someone who, at least in the state attorney's race, there's not someone who's qualified or the right candidate. But I believe I'm the right candidate. I've been putting in the work to meet everyone I can and to connect with the people in our community and let them know what I'm all about. But back in 2020, for example, there was no Republican candidate at all. So there was only a 4-candidate Democratic primary, and that was completely unbalanced, which is one of the reasons why I'm running. Both Aramis Ayala and Monique Worrell were funded by Outside PAC, which was funded by a billionaire. And if political contributions are speech, as the Supreme Court says they are,
correct.
The amount of money that you can invest in spreading a candidate's message is the loudness of that speech.
Correct.
So if you have a candidate who's, let's say, the 4th or 3rd out of those 4, let's say they raised $100,000 each, and then at the last minute, $1 million, $2 million gets dumped in on behalf of one candidate, that candidate, I would say that I don't believe Monique Worrell or Aramis Ayala would have won the state attorney's races when they ran if not for the money from that outside billionaire.
And that's really where I want to go. This is an expensive race. You have 2 counties that you're running in. It's not easy, but getting out there and introducing yourself, it must be, I'm going to say it this way. It must be really easy when you say, hey, you see what's going on right now? I'm the first Republican to run. No, it's not, is it? Nobody knows what the state attorney is.
You would be surprised. I get a lot of mixed. So I spend a lot of time going to farmers markets. I have spent time getting booths at 5Ks and runs, and I went to a jazz festival, and I'm going to go to more public things like that. And I'm just very talkative. I will literally walk up to strangers and just start, talking to them, because I genuinely think part of the problem is that politicians are so busy talking at people that they're not spending time listening to people.
But that's one of the most important things we always talk about when you're looking for a job. It's about the listening. It's not about, what you say, because the more you listen, you'll know what to say.
Establishing relationships.
Right. And actually, you'd be surprised. There are a lot of secret Republicans in town. So I know this from growing up here, and I grew up in Maitland, and there's certain communities that lean a little bit more to the right, and other communities that lean a little bit more to the left. And I know many families here, let's say the kids might be Democrats and the parents might be Republicans, or the husband might be a Republican and the wife might be a Democrat, or vice versa. This has always been a relatively purple community. And even though the end result of various elections in the past have led to, by and large, Democrats being elected, I think that the state attorney's race, how can you possibly know when no viable Republican has ever even run? So in the 2020 race, you have Monique Worrell defeated Belvin Perry, Deborah Barra, and Ryan Williams.
Right.
And then she faced an NPA who's a great local defense attorney. He's a friend of mine, actually. Great guy. But I've looked back at the statistics from the Division of Elections. No NPA has ever won any race throughout Florida ever.
There's a 2-party system. The MPA is only there to close the primary. It's
And
only to make sure that the primary then becomes the general election.
and then if there is a MPA who is running and believes that they are a viable candidate, having the infrastructure, the political infrastructure in place is just not there compared to the two other parties, and unfortunately, uh, there is no organized NPA organization that will rally their voters, that will do outreach to those voters and select candidates to run on a ticket, and that's the failure of this particular system.
I mean, I personally struggle and don't completely agree with conversations that center around systems, because systems are people, right? We decide what the rules are. We elect our representatives. If there are changes to the state constitution, we ratify those changes. And so that's one of my beefs actually with Monique Worrell, is that she and Aramis, they're two peas in a pod, from what I've seen, and they're constantly railing on the system, right? But the system is made up of people,
Right.
and if you have prosecutors, defense attorneys, police officers, corrections officers, judges who are as good at their job as humanly possible and trying to improve and get better at their job, what makes up the system will be justice. And I think it is justice. I mean, I do not want to get arrested anywhere, but if I were to be arrested, I would much rather get arrested in Orange County than North Korea or Russia or Somalia or some other country where justice is non-existent. There's a lot of conversation on the left. Monique is a self-proclaimed progressive Democrat. I'm not labeling her; she's labeled herself. There's a complaint about the criminal justice system and how criminal justice reform needs to happen. And what that has taken on is the fact that, because in their opinion, the United States is not the number one justice system in the entire world, even though it's arguably certainly in the top 10, because it's not perfect, let's just throw the baby out with the bathwater, when clearly we live in a wonderful country. We live in a wonderful community. That's why people want to move to Orlando. That's why people want to immigrate to America.
Yeah, when you start experimenting in the office of the state attorney, you don't know what you're going to get. We had talked, David and I had talked earlier about this situation with Worrell and what the numbers were looking like, and David's a Democrat. He's supposed to hate you. I'm just letting you know. No, but no, that David is a Democrat, and it comes to the point where we saw this train wreck coming, and that's going to be my next subject that I'm going to get into with you. But David seemed to want to say something first.
Right, we looked at the numbers in that previous podcast back in the spring.
Which numbers specifically are you talking about?
The cases that were dropped,
juvenile cases.
Right, and I worked in child welfare in Illinois for 21 years, and so I worked.
Bless your heart.
Thank you. What was left, I guess, it was hard work. And I work with law enforcement. I work with judges, state's attorneys, public defenders, administrative law judges, so forth and so on. So I had a good idea of what the issues were and the issues that need to be addressed. And so when I first met Ayala and Worrell prior to their campaigns, I saw where they were getting at. I saw that there was a need for specific demographics, specific communities like the Black community, needing more attention. And then I thought back after we had that conversation and looking at the numbers and then looking at my own past experience with the criminal justice system, with the system in general, and say, how many more times are we going to try the same tactics, expecting different results? And a lot of this was familiar. And then I see the news reports of more violent crimes, horrendous stuff.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, okay, when do we say there are alternatives? When do we start speaking to the community about alternatives and specifically going back to law and order?
It is, those numbers are really disturbing. I speak to police officers very regularly. I speak to prosecutors and defense attorneys very regularly, and I have my own experience. You know, the juvenile crime issue is a big problem recently. It's the juvenile crime rates have been going up. The levels of very serious crimes of juveniles have gone up. And look, it's a delicate situation, because you don't want to just say, well, this person is a juvenile, let's just treat them like an adult. Obviously their
Right.
brains are still formulating, they're still learning, they're still in school, hopefully, but at the same time, you don't want to just treat them with kid gloves,
Right.
because they are in many circumstances acting like adults, right? And the real question is, the age is 18, right? Is a 16-year-old or 17-year-old who's 6'3" to be treated like an adult? Or are they different than, like, a 4'5" 11-year-old? I was very short as a little kid. Some people are as big as an adult. So I think that it's really iffy, but you don't want to teach these kids the wrong lessons.
Right.
So when I was a prosecutor, I never was a prosecutor at juvenile. When I was there, we had the choice to either apply to be a prosecutor in the juvenile division for a period of time, or to be a DUI specialist. I really don't like DUIs. They kill people, and they're not taken as seriously as they should. So I decided to become a DUI specialist.
Okay.
However, the general feel and the reputation of being a prosecutor in the juvenile crime world is that it's a revolving door.
Yes.
And it only got much, much worse under Aramis Ayala and Monique Worrell, because, I don't have any kids, but I was a kid, and I have everyone I know was a kid, and I'm not saying that we need to treat our kids like adults all the time, but sometimes you got to have a little tough love.
Yes, there are consequences to our actions.
And additionally, one thing that people don't talk about is that there's a lot of discussion of reducing gun crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Many gun crimes result from kids, juveniles, walking around parking lots, trying door handles. The door handles open, they look for stuff in the car. Too many people who lawfully own firearms accidentally, or through just rushing or whatever, leave their firearm in their vehicle. It gets stolen, and then it gets passed around. And it's not necessarily like the 15-year-old kid that finds the gun is looking for a gun.
Right.
And then once they do get the gun, it's not like they're the ones that are committing the serious crimes. These guns in poor neighborhoods get passed around, whether they're sold or whether they're just given.
Yeah.
So there's so much discussion about how to stop firearm crimes and death and things like that. Securely storing your firearm is so important. Every police agency should have a public service campaign about properly storing your firearms.
I like that.
There's a lot of good that can be done with public service campaigns.
Well, that's an excellent point, because my favorite commercial drug commercial was the eggs being dropped in the hot pan, and that image of this is your brain, and this is your brain on drugs. It made an impact, but they didn't tell me outright, don't do drugs in that commercial. But if you tell somebody you teach somebody how to store their gun, you don't tell them how to store their gun, but you explain it. Most of us law-abiding people, we're going to say, you know what, that's a smart idea, so I'm going to follow suit. And that's what those commercials are supposed to do. So I think it's great that you brought that up. But we have to, there's always something in the way in our campaigns, and your campaign was going smooth for a little bit. What do you, without getting you in trouble, what is your opinion of the governor's action to take Worrell out of office?
Well, I'm glad she's no longer the state attorney. I think it's better for our community. And she was a state attorney for 2.5 years. And so for 1.5 years, we will be safer. And I will say that, at this point, I'm focused on my race. I put my papers in January before Monique Worrell because I was so upset about what I was seeing her doing. People were quitting that office like they were leaving a sinking ship. And she went on the news over and over and over and over and over and over. She just loves press conferences. But she kept telling people that she could not pay people enough money. But meanwhile, a lot of those people ended up going to work as prosecutors in neighboring counties.
Right.
So some of them did go work in civil firms, but they wanted to be prosecutors. Usually young prosecutors are fresh out of law school.
Right.
It's a public service. It's like teaching, right? It's like being a police officer.
Yep.
And so a lot of people quit and they went to Seminole County, Lake County, Volusia County, Polk County. And that's because within that office, based on her policies, even if those policies were not explicit,
okay,
but when you have Monique Worrell saying everything that she was saying about the justice system being completely unfair, and we need to formulate a new system, and drug crimes are victimless crimes, and all sorts of falsehoods that I don't agree with personally, that message kind of filters down through the managers and to these young prosecutors. So they felt, from my observation, I'm not them, so I can't speak for them, but I believe that they felt that they couldn't do their job, so they had to leave. I heard many stories of people who had very serious criminals they wanted to put in prison, and whether it was a direct order or an implication, those people were, it was made clear that those defendants that should have been in prison were going to be put on probation.
Okay, so
wow.
So let's go history for a little bit. So Ayala, she outright said she wasn't going to prosecute death penalties.
Correct.
And she wasn't removed. All her cases were
Or
removed,
she was going to
and it was
the
under
death penalty.
What's up?
She wasn't going to seek the death penalty.
Yeah, she wasn't going to for anybody. Yeah, so that means you're not going to prosecute anybody for the death penalty.
Well, she would prosecute those cases, but she would only pursue life in prison versus pursuing death.
I get it.
Yep.
So she wasn't
Facts
removed.
matter. Facts
I know,
matter.
but I'm saying she wasn't removed. She wasn't removed under, and that would have been under the previous governor, right? Because he would have moved those cases. What is the people screaming right now are saying that our governor, overreached and took somebody, an elected official. That's the person that's supposed to be representing us, right? That's where their argument is. Do you think that do you think that Ayala should have been removed?
Well, weren't those cases taken?
They were shifted. Now, I mean, I get that they were shifted out away from her.
Okay,
so that they would be prosecuted to the nth degree, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Full extent.
But was the other governor, Governor Scott, wrong? didn't know how much power he had, or is this just confusing me?
So I certainly am not going to comment on whether then Governor, now Senator Rick Scott made a mistake. I'm definitely not going to say something like that. What I will say is that you're correct. And actually, I worked there during that time. So I worked for Jeff Ashton, and then I worked for Aramis Ayala for about a year before I started my practice. Now, the governor of Florida has the legal right under the Constitution, which
right.
was ratified by the public,
Correct.
to have that power. Every governor we've had in recent memory, from Ron DeSantis, Rick Scott, Jeb Bush, Charlie Crist, going back, has exercised that right.
Yes, they have.
Whether it was a state attorney, or whether it was a sheriff, or whether it was someone on a school board or something like that. Now, the question is not whether the power exists. It's kind of like a prosecutor with a case, right?
Right.
You have the first question a prosecutor needs to ask when they get a case from law enforcement is, can I prove this beyond a reasonable doubt to a unanimous jury in court? The second question is justice served by doing so? Should I prosecute this person? So in a way, it's all based on the facts.
Right.
And the facts of each of those circumstances with other governors were different than the facts relating to Monique Worrell. And the facts with Aramis Ayala and the state attorney in Tampa as well, all those facts are different. So it's, Governor DeSantis has exercised that right, I believe, more than prior governors. But that's his right to do. And
Yes,
Monique Worrell is challenging it in the state Supreme Court, and she will challenge it in the state Senate. She has due process. There's a hearing, oral arguments were just scheduled in December, and we'll see what happens. I mean, the thing is that people who like Monique Worrell are going to say that it's unjust. But what they are refusing to acknowledge is that power was created by the people, and to add something to the Constitution takes a whole lot more than the number of votes for Monique Worrell.
That's
so
true.
I mean, she is constantly talking about her the percentage of what she won the 2020 election by in the general, right? So she's talking about Monique Worrell versus an NPA who didn't have a party to back him and didn't, have all that backing. So she's saying, I won whatever it was, 2/3 to 1/3. But if you look at the number of people that actually voted,
Were eligible to vote.
Yeah, but if you look at the people who actually voted in the Democratic primary, the people that voted for Monique Worrell, and like you're saying, Republicans did not have the right to have their voice heard, and NPAs did not have the right to have their voice heard in the Democratic primary.
Correct.
If that was an open primary, I believe Belvin Perry would have won.
Oh, absolutely.
And to take it further, and
I'm so sorry. Just one last thing. So if you look at the actual number of votes that Monique Worrell got in the Democratic primary, it is only 5% of the people registered to vote in Orange and Osceola County. She's going out there saying, oh, I got 60%, 65% of the vote. It's a mandate, blah, blah, blah. But really,
see, Seth, this is exactly what this show is all about, because you can't make this shit up. We literally talk about this stuff, and David would be the first to defend or to fight with this stuff. But this is a true statement. 100%. You have to look at the facts.
Thank you.
Not the feelings.
Yep. And as you were saying, Seth, about the manipulation of the numbers, she can say that has a mandate based on who actually voted in that particular primary, so forth and so on. However, which Joel, again, we talked about this, the shock and the amazement of what the governor did by suspending her. Just kind of amazed me as a liberal Democrat. I say, well, didn't you see this coming? I mean, really, what's with this so-called outrage?
She did see it coming. She did see it coming, but she blamed it on the Republican Party was coming after her.
I am talking about her allies and things like that, because I don't like to play around with politics. I take this very seriously, and it's about doing the best for all of our community.
Absolutely.
And to see the outrage, the so-called outrage, and say, really, I'm sorry, I'm about to get into my feelings here, but the frustration, and I said, let's get back to what the role of the state's attorney is.
Well, let me ask you this, David. As a Democrat, if if Monique were, let's just say, not Monique were, let's say a Democrat, faceless, nameless Democrat,
Sure.
or a Republican, gets elected to be the state attorney, and they literally drop every single case. This is a fictional circumstance, right?
Sure.
They literally drop every single case. Do not prosecute one person. Do you think that that person is doing their job?
No.
And do you think that person is doing what the people elected them to do?
No.
Right. So then the devil's in the details, right?
That's correct.
So at what point, Monique Worrell is, and I don't know her personally, so I'm not going to call her Monique. Monique Worrell is out there constantly talking about that she was just exercising her prosecutorial discretion. Now, a prosecutor does have prosecutorial discretion. Like I said,
Right.
certain cases you should go forward if you think you can get a guilt, if you have a reasonable belief that you can get a guilty verdict in trial. That's when you should go forward. However, she is claiming that how her office worked was an exercise of her prosecutorial discretion, but there's a range. So at some point it was observed by pretty much everyone in this town, not only prosecutors who were quitting the office,
Sure.
but other defense attorneys knew about it. Every law enforcement agency knew about it. In fact, they were very, very upset by how the state attorney's office was being run. And that was really just that communication was totally broken.
And I get wanting to have a program to address certain societal ills and try to come up with a solution. However, at the stake of the safety of the community, the concerns of the community, and again, my proximity to the law enforcement field goes back 30 odd years. Oh my God, I'm aging at 35. I'm aging myself here. So I do understand. I do understand what happens in the state's attorney's office, public defender's office, and the judge's quarters. Very good friends with judges that I worked with and worked for back in Illinois. I get it. However, the results does not. It doesn't add up to the performance, to the type of programming or the agenda.
I think that the core issue is that, Monique, from what I've observed, my focus is on protecting the victims and protecting the community. Monique's entire framework in the law, in trial lawyering, we talk about framing the issue.
Sure.
And so her entire focus is on the defendant. And it makes sense because she was a public defender, right?
Sure.
And so she was a public defender for 2 years here in Orange County. But, I think the state attorney's job is to protect the victims, focus on the community, protect the community. And every organization in our society has a mission. There are wonderful civil service agencies in our community that are funded by the government, that should be fully and overly funded by the government. And their mission, one would be maybe fighting homelessness, another would be fighting poverty, another would be fighting helping people with mental illness, drug addiction. Those organizations should be fully funded. However, their mission should not be placed on law enforcement and the state attorney's office. It's not the state attorney's job, just like it's not a cop's job to teach your kid math.
That's correct.
Right. And so it's also not the job of the state attorney or the assistant state attorney to focus on, well, what happened to this defendant in their childhood to cause them to become a criminal. That makes you lose
social working.
It makes you lose sight of. That's funny that you say that, because my analysis, and my mom was a teacher in elementary school in the 60s in Chicago. She has a master's degree in social work. I am very pro education, very pro social work. The state attorney is not a social worker. And I believe that Monique Worrell approached that job as someone who wants to be a social worker. And if she wants to affect those spaces in our society, she should have run for state legislature.
See, this is exactly what we
now
talk
we're
about.
getting into it.
Run
Yeah.
for the right job. If you want gun control, you run for the state house. If you want, you don't run for Congress. If you want to fix the law, you go to the legislature. No, I'm glad you bring that up because you can't make this shit up. She chose the wrong place.
Well, the question is was it on purpose, right? So here's and I'm not trying to inject any Machiavellian thing going on, but when I was working in that office as an assistant state attorney under Jeff Ashton and Aramis Ayala ran, I heard her say that being the state attorney would give her more power, in her view, to do good, to reform, than being a public defender, because Aramis Ayala had been a public defender most of her career. She was an assistant state attorney for a few years. I actually worked with her for a year or two. Not directly, but I would pass her in the hallway.
Sure.
I knew who she was. And so the question is, does someone who has a very left-wing agenda, a very self-described progressive agenda, to completely change the crime and punishment system that we have, that has been established for decades, at hundreds of years, and works great in this community and this country, which can be improved.
Sure.
And we're always
There's
working
always
to
room for
improve.
improvement.
But is it a conscious decision that if I go up to Tallahassee, I'm one voice in a supermajority Republican legislature where I can't get anything done? Or or do I run for state attorney where I have the power to literally prosecute criminals or not prosecute criminals? That's mind-boggling.
I'm glad you mentioned about the social services that work with the state's attorney's office. And my concern in all of this is, instead of the top-down approach, holding these nonprofits, and I understand there are thousands upon 10,000s of social service agencies here in Central Florida, trying to help, trying to contribute some well-being, some goodness to our communities, and holding those entities accountable for results is what I would look at first before trying reforms and from the top down. And that's the frustration that I've seen here in Florida compared to in Chicago, Illinois. They had their issues. However, now that I'm here in Florida, seeing this network of nonprofits, but seeing the same results over and over and over again.
I'm not sure how these are problems that cities across America are dealing with. That I think comes down to the county mayor, the city mayor,
Yes.
It's all about accountability.
Yes.
When you talk to the mayor of Orlando and you ask a question, and then that mayor says, "Oh, well, that's a county issue." And then you talk to the Orange County Council and you bring up something in the public comment time, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's more of a city of Orlando issue, or that's a Winter Park issue." I mean, I'm really a collaborator.
Sure.
And when I'm the state attorney, I want to make it a top priority to have active, regular communication with other agencies, not just law enforcement. I think it's essential that I don't want to give away all my plans to have Monique steal them, but I think that the head of the juvenile division should be meeting with the superintendent of schools and the school board regularly.
That's smart.
There are just a whole host of ways that we can integrate law enforcement and the state attorney's office with civil society that doesn't place the burdens and the responsibility of these other agencies on police and on the prosecutor, but it's more about partnerships.
Right. Partnerships, relationships. How is your relationship with local law enforcement?
I think it's very good. I've been spending a lot of time meeting with police chiefs, police unions. I haven't met with the sheriffs yet. I am trying to lock those meetings down. And obviously, whenever I encounter police, law enforcement, I go up, I talk to them, I introduce myself to them. If they don't, some already know me from my time as a prosecutor and a defense attorney. But I fully support law enforcement. I'm a pro law enforcement candidate, and I hope after the qualifying dates are in April.
Yes.
So as far as endorsements and things like that, most people are kind of on the fence, waiting to see what happens, if anything different happens in April, before April.
So I got a couple questions that are really off the wall, but you work for Jeff Ashton.
I did.
And you know what's going on there.
I do.
Okay. So any indication that, that you work with him, there's no indication that he was this way, right?
I mean, I think Jeff Ashton was a great state attorney. I think he was a great leader of that office. People loved working there. That was the biggest change with Aramis Ayala when she took office. She created multiple levels of middle management that had not existed before, put certain people in power that were just, you can be a great prosecutor and be a terrible manager. And under
true.
Aramis, the management was just really, really bad. And that's why a lot of people left as well, because it was so fun to work for Jeff Ashton. And in this community, Jeff Ashton has been one of the, great prosecutors in 1982, 83, 84, something. I think he started working for Robert Egan, the former state attorney, in 82. He was the first prosecutor in the whole country to use DNA to prove a murder. And I think that's all I'm going to say about that.
No, that's what I'm trying to get at. I think he got a bum rap because he lost a case that was overhyped, and that's it. And like Belvin Perry, he's another one that I think that he made connections with the community. How do you plan on getting people to know Seth Hyman?
Well, I believe in old-fashioned political work. That's why I've been going to all of these community events. After the new year, I'm going to be knocking on doors like nobody's business. I have made it my mission to meet as many people as possible. I've been joining a lot of local community groups. I have been, like I said, meeting with law enforcement, meeting with the police unions. I'm trying to meet with, I've met with a lot of groups. I've met with tourism groups, hotel groups, and a lot of many different business industries in our community. It has never been articulated to them how important it is to the business that we have a safe community. In the past, generally, the state attorney's race is just about, the direct work that the state attorney does and the assistant state attorneys do. But there's all of these collateral consequences related to tourism, related to other industries that we now see because we have an example of things not working, not only in our community, but to the extreme in places like San Francisco. You mentioned things like, well, we don't know what would happen if, right? And I often talk about drug crimes because I think drug crimes are very, very serious. And other people, have issues with drug crimes, saying that they're victimless crimes. I don't think they're victimless crimes. A lot of, when you have people who are stealing and robbing in order to buy drugs, this ties back to what I was saying before. If somebody comes up to you in a public park or on a side street in a dark alley and sticks a gun in your face, you're not going to be thinking, oh, I wonder if they had a terrible childhood. You're going to be thinking, why is this person threatening to end my life? And that's why I want to focus so much on the victims. And so meeting people, I've been telling people about my background, telling people about what I hope to do. And just the fact is, I'm a local. I honestly don't know how long Monique Worrell has lived here. All I can say is that I grew up here. Right. I went to Edgewater High School, and when you meet people and they say that they grew up here, the first thing that people say is, "Oh, where'd you go to high school?" And that connection to Orlando in the 70s, 80s, and 90s is a connection that the people here don't want to lose. That connection to the legacy of Lawson Lamar, Robert Egan, is a legacy that we need and people want to get back to. So that's how I've been trying to meet people, and I've been telling people I want them to become Seth Hyman super fans. Right?
There you go.
Well, if you're if you're out there and you want to be a super fan, remember, this is going to be an expensive race. Yeah. Have you done the numbers? Have you really looked at how much this is going to cost you?
Well, yes, of course. In the context of everything, we're in a little bit of an unprecedented circumstance because Monique Worrell was suspended by Governor DeSantis. Mm-hmm. She's gone immediately on all of the national liberal Democrat shows on MSNBC and really, really made this narrative of herself that she's the victim, she's a martyr, she's the properly elected state attorney. Governor DeSantis is the tyrant, bad guy, and let's fight for like the movie Braveheart or something. Sure. And that was a rallying cry for her. In the 2020 election, she raised $200,000. Judge Perry raised $200,000. Ryan Williams and Deb Barra each raised about $100,000. Right. So my goal has been initially to try to raise $250,000. It's a high number, but I'd certainly think it's doable over the course of time. We're still very, very early in the race. However, because of what's been going on here, Monique Worrell did report a very significant bump in fundraising. Sure. And however, I believe in people power. People cast votes, not dollars.
Right. That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
Anybody can give, right?
Anybody
as a U.S. citizen can give up to
$1,000. Yes,
to a state campaign. So
So my website is electsethhyman2024.com. That's ELECTSETHHYMAN 2024.com. Actually, I've recently released a new commercial on my YouTube page and posting it on social media and just trying to get that spread virally. The people that I talk to, I want them to tell their neighbors.
Make sure we have that link so that we can share it, because even if we have your opponents on, we always want to respect that your Twitter, your X, your Facebook and that stuff, we support it, because we want them, anybody out there that likes you or hates you, we want to make sure they know how to get a hold of you.
Yeah. Well, I jokingly say to people, check out my website. If you like what we've talked about here and you like what I have on my website, please tell all your neighbors, all your friends, your community. If you don't like what I have to say, don't tell anybody.
That's the best way to do it. Or change the election to an off year. But you can't do that. I've intentionally not spoken about the other subject of who replaced Worrell. I do that out of respect, but I have seen a lot of the judge in Republican circles now, which I would never see before. That's because the judge can't go, but he's now the state attorney. You are prepared. I know you are. If you do draw an opponent.
Yes. If So right now, the state attorney, Andrew Bain, has not put in his papers to run. So it's unknown. It's a question I get asked a lot. And I really only deal with my reality on the ground
Exactly.
as it is right now. My reality is my papers are in. I'm a candidate. I'm the Republican candidate. Monique Worrell is a candidate. Her papers are in. She's the Democrat. Now, she is because of everything that's gone on, I expect that she will raise more money than she did last time.
Well, sure.
Right?
She'll
It makes sense.
fundraise off of all of this.
Throughout nationwide, people will give $10, $20, that sort of a thing.
Right.
We have a different circumstance in the future. Well, we'll deal with it as it comes.
No, that's exactly what that's why I said, look, confidence. I just want to end this with you telling me and the audience, what does State Attorney Seth Hyman's office look like when he takes over?
Seth Hyman's office as the state attorney is going to be as much a prosecutor's office as an institute of higher learning. I want the prosecutors in that office to be the best trial lawyers in Florida. I want them to be the most expert criminal law practitioners in Florida and the country. I think that the practice of law requires constant learning, and any prosecutor who thinks that they've got criminal law down is looking at it in the wrong way. There's always more to learn. I want to dramatically increase the training that we have there. That's always been a complaint under every state attorney I've ever heard. The training has been not adequate. So I want to have weekly trainings in all sorts of subject matters. How do you prove a theft? How do you prove a burglary? How do you prove a DUI? How do you prove, it's not just about murders and sexual assaults. And obviously those are very, very, very serious. But the vast majority of people encounter the public safety system through misdemeanors, and those can affect their lives very dramatically. So I want to open up those trainings to law enforcement. 150 years ago, police officers were all volunteer. And at some point in time, we as a society decided that law enforcement should be a profession, and they should be paid. They should have a set amount of training with certain education that was could be replicated throughout the country. I think that we are at a new point where police officers and sheriff's deputies and troopers should be getting trained by the state attorney's office and be given effectively some sort of a advanced certificate that's almost like a master's degree in criminal, not a degree, but a master's certificate in criminal policing, where they have significantly more experience and knowledge about criminal law than they are required to have now. And that's just one little thing. But making sure to say this point, I'm going to prosecute people accused of crimes to the fullest extent of the law. When they're convicted, I'm going to make sure they're sentenced accordingly. And what that means is that they're repeat offenders. If they're violent offenders, they're going to be incarcerated, because I believe in deterrence. I believe that there is a deterrent effect to the person. And I've experienced it. I've spoken to people who've spent time in jail, both when I was a prosecutor and a defense attorney. And some of those people said that it was the best thing that happened to them. Okay. Because they were out of control. They didn't know how, they were hanging out with the wrong people. Their life was on the wrong path, and it just shook them to the core and caused them to make a change. And so I think it is essential. Obviously, everyone should not be incarcerated. I strongly believe in diversion programs as well for first-time offenders. But when people are incarcerated, the focus shouldn't just be on the person who's incarcerated. The focus is on justice for the victim. The focus is, if the person's a repeat offender, and they can't stop committing these crimes. It protects the public if they're in jail or in prison, because if they were out there, they would be committing new crimes and there would be new victims created.
Good point.
And I want to make sure that our attention is focused where it should be. And I don't think under Aramis Ayala and Monique Worrell, the attention has been focused where it should be.
I had interviews yesterday, and I had a lot of fun with the young people that I got to talk to. But one of the questions that I had for them, I think, just kind of popped in my head. If you were to have a headline of your life,
Oh boy.
yeah, see that's what they say too. What would the headline be? Just think about that. We're not answering it today, but David, you have anything else?
I this has been a trip down memory lane for me. Just remembering my work in Illinois with the child welfare system and having relationships with prosecutors, public defenders, judges, so forth and so on, and just hearing you talk and again going back to the basics of law and order and justice for the victims and protecting the vulnerable. And so this was refreshing to have this conversation. I could go on and on.
Yeah, I could talk about this for
my
forever.
goodness.
I mean, what I've been trying to get out there and tell people is that I believe in common sense prosecution.
Mhm.
And I think that Central Floridians are common sense people. When my wife was in high school, they didn't go to school for, rodeo day. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is not New York City.
Right. Right.
We have a completely unique community, and the people that have moved here for a reason. People have moved here not because they don't want Orlando to be Chicago or San Francisco or New York.
I agree. When I came here to Orlando, I was looking for something different than Chicago. I do miss Chicago. I miss certain things about Chicago. However, I was expecting something different, a certain level of safety or lack of worrying about, okay, am I safe? And in the last maybe year or two, I've had a concern about my safety. And I'm pretty street smart, and having that fear at my age, at this point in my life, is uncomfortable. And I really appreciate the conversations that we've had today. I'm looking forward to a very exciting race, and we welcome Monique Worrell, Andrew Bain, anyone who has a valid opinion with facts to comment, to engage with us, be a part of our community, and have that conversation. And open invitation to future candidates for not just this race, for other races.
Like, share, check out his website.
Yes. What is it again?
It's electsethhyman2024.com. All of my social media is linked from there. My new commercial is there. And I want to thank Joel and David for inviting me to have this conversation. A main reason why I'm running is because I think that we need this dialogue. We haven't had the dialogue because no Republican has run. I have been discouraged, or I have been asked by many people, don't you think you should switch to being a Democrat? This is Orange County. A Republican can't win. But, the reality is 40% of the registered voters in Orange and Osceola County are Democrats, but that means 60% aren't. And I believe that public safety shouldn't be a partisan issue. Everyone deserves to be safe, whether they're a Democrat, NPA, or Republican, whether they're rich or poor, whether they're black or white. And that should be the conversation.
I know we're wrapping up, Joel, but I also want to say, Seth, thank you so much for becoming a member of County Watch and engaging the membership there. It's rare that we have that consistency from a candidate for office, particularly for state's attorney. So that is so refreshing that you're there and that you're engaging.
It shows that you care about
Yeah.
the county, and that was a great moment when you did that. He is a community person. He's got my support 100%. Listen, you got my support no matter who jumps in this race. But I don't live in this county, so unfortunately, that's not going to help you. But it's a true human being that can do that they can do the job that's not being done right now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seth.